Welcome in Café Weltschmerz. I am Rico Brouwer. And my guest today is Stefania Maurizi, investigative journalist from Italy, who's been reconstructing Julian Assange's case on a fact-finding mission, acquiring solid factual information through the Freedom of Information Act in multiple jurisdictions. Hello, Stefania.
Hello, Rico. Thanks for your interest in my investigation.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about that one. So this is recorded from the Netherlands. I take it you're in Italy, or no?
Yes, I'm in Italy.
Okay, cool. So to start off with, I read you called Julian Assange the only Western publisher arbitrarily detained in the heart of Europe. And the United Nations rapporteur also called his detention arbitrary. And United Nations confirmed Assange is a victim of psychological torture. So that's established. So that's laying the groundwork here. Before we go into your search for what's actually happened over the last 10 years or so, could you tell us how he's doing currently?
Well, his health is seriously declining. You can imagine the impact of this detention. After 9 years, he has been detained, basically 1 year and a half under house arrest, and then 7 years confined to a tiny building without an hour outdoors. So you can imagine now being in a high security prison and in a single cell and under strict rules, which you can have in this high security prison. You can see the impact on him. I'm seriously concerned. It has been sad to witness how his health has been seriously declining in the last 9 years.
Yeah. So I want to walk chronologically through time to where we are today and pick up halfway that story with the FOIAs that you did, Freedom of Information Act in different countries. Now, to start off with, WikiLeaks was started in 2006, and then you started a media partnership with them in 2009. Could you elaborate on that one? How did that start?
Yes. So you have to realize that I'm very interested in investigating the top level of power. It's, I think our listeners realize that there are different levels of power. The visible ones, like the politicians who are in charge of our public services, schools, education, universities, and things like that. That kind of level is visible, and Western journalists are allowed to investigate that level of power, are allowed to expose scandals about that, the visible level of powers. They can expose kind of abuse of power. They can expose corruption involving this level of power. They can expose sex scandals. In Italy, we had all sorts of sex scandals related to our former Prime Minister Berlusconi. So that level of power is visible, and there is no serious risk. If you are a journalist, if you are an investigative journalist and want to expose scandals, it's about that level of power. So you may be hit by libel cases and exposing scandals about politicians may reveal maybe kind of liability for your career. But usually in our democracies, in our liberal democracies, investigating and exposing that level of power is fully allowed. The problem arises when journalists touch the highest level of power, the level where diplomacies, states, intelligence agencies operate. That level of power is protected by thick layers of secrecies. He doesn't like the sunlight, and he has a true horror of continuous exposure. So what immediately understood when WikiLeaks came out is that WikiLeaks was interested in that level of power. And for me, it was really important because, I live in a country where we had the strategy of tension. We had a very difficult time, a history of political violence. We had massacres, we had attacks where many people died. And to this day, 6 years after, we don't have the truth about those attacks. We don't have the truth about the Bologna massacre, for example. We don't have the truth about the massacres related to the political violence of the strategy of tension. And so for me, it was really important that for the first time, an organization had been established to get the secrets related to intelligence agency, related to the diplomacies, to this highest level of power, exposing this kind of secrets. So back in 2008, actually, one of my sources was in trouble. And I realized at that point, that it was important to establish a better system of a more reliable and more secure channel of communications with my sources. And since before journalism, I got a degree in mathematics, for me it was kind of natural looking at cryptography as a tool to protect my communication with my sources. So it was one of my sources inside the field of cryptography, which basically put WikiLeaks on my radar screen. At that time, back in 2008, very few people had even heard of WikiLeaks. So at that point in 2008, I started looking at their work. I looked closely what they were doing, how they were using cryptography to protect sources, what were their ideas. And so back in 2009, when they had the file about Italy, they contacted me to ask for help to verify that file. And so we started our partnership back in 2009 when very, very few had heard about WikiLeaks, because WikiLeaks hadn't published the bombshells, like collateral murder or
you got what you wanted, because that's what happened as of 2010. Those were the big exposures.
Exactly. So I started before the big bombshells, and when the big bombshells came out, I was already there, and I was already, confident about their kind of work. I knew about their work they were doing and so on.
Yeah, so that started in the disclosures made by WikiLeaks started in 2010, and continued in the following years. So can you go into what happened between 2010 and when you decided, well, I need to figure out what's going on. I'm going to go do Freedom of Information Act requests. So how did that come about?
Yes. So basically, from 2009 to these days, I have been working on all the documents, secret documents, looking for, first of all, verifying the documents, because it's really important that when you get these documents, you have doubts about whether they are genuine, whether they are legitimate, whether they may be fabricated, and so on. It's a very difficult work. It's proper journalistic work, because you have to verify whether these documents are true or whether they are not true. And you have to look for angles, for characters, investigation, and so on. It's a proper journalistic work. While doing this work, I realized the huge risk that WikiLeaks, Julian Assange and the WikiLeaks journalists, I want to mention some of them, whose identities are public. The current editor of WikiLeaks, Christine Rasson, the WikiLeaks journalist, Joseph Farrell, and the journalist who flew to Hong Kong to help Edward Snowden, Sarah Harrison. These are some of the WikiLeaks journalists. And when working on their documents, when doing this kind of journalistic work with them for my newspaper, I realized they were taking serious risks. These risks that not even big newspapers like the newspaper I'm working for are willing to shoulder, you know. So in 2015, Julian Assange had already spent 5 years under detention. He had spent 1 year and a half under house arrest, and he had already spent 3 years confined to the Ecuadorian embassy. In 2015, I realized that no journalist, no media had ever tried to get the documents about the case, which was quite incredible to me because, you know, the first step for a journalist is to look at the factual information, to look for documents in order to get the facts right, you know. So at that point, I decided I have to do this. I must do it. I have to try to get all the documents about Julian Assange, about the WikiLeaks journalist, and try to understand the case, trying to get factual information about the case. And since then, I'm still working on this FOIA, which is basically is going on for the last 4 years.
Yeah. So we're going to do two major FOIA tracks, if you will, in this conversation. Before we do that, so chronologically, 2010 were the first big revelations made by WikiLeaks, followed, as Mr. Nils Meltzer explained to me, the Special Rapporteur on Torture for the United Nations, followed by United States looking for something to blame Assange with. And lo and behold, there was a rape accusation from Sweden made also that year. Now that eventually led to Assange seeking asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. And well, he was been there for 3 years when you started to do FOIA, correct?
Yes, I mean, as a matter of fact, I don't think that the Swedish case was a plot by the United States, if you ask me. It's a case which has been exploited by the UK authorities and very likely by the US authorities to keep Julian Assange basically trapped in London, to keep him basically under arbitrary detention, and now to try to get him extradited to the US. So I don't think it was a plot. I don't think it was a conspiracy. It has been used in an instrumental way, of course. And my FOIA case provides evidence on how the UK authority have been used this case in order to keep Assange basically arbitrarily detained. Yeah. This is a matter of fact, because they were basically, they advised the Swedish prosecutors against going to London to question Julian Assange, which would have allowed to have a quick closure to this judicial case.
Yeah, so let's look into that one then. So Assange is in the Ecuadorian embassy in London for that rape accusation case from Sweden. By the way, if people want to learn more about that, I'll put a link to the interview with Nils Meltzer under this interview so they can hear all about what actually happened there. But Assange said, yeah, well, I'm not going to Sweden. I might get extradited to the United States. So, you know what? How about you interview me here, either through online connection like I'm talking to you, or just visit me in the Ecuadorian embassy. And that's not uncommon. Sweden has done that before. Now, Sweden didn't do that. They wanted Assange to go to Sweden. And you started asking questions. So could you tell me what went on when you started doing that in 2015?
Yeah, so the first, my idea was if I can get documents from Sweden, which basically was investigating Julian Assange for these sexual allegations, if I can get these documents from Sweden, which is quite an open jurisdiction when it comes to access to documents, well, maybe I can use these Swedish documents as a picklock to get more documents from the UK, from the US, from Australia, and it worked. Basically, as soon as I filed this FOIA to the Swedish prosecutors, they basically released me few documents, but very important documents, because these documents are released to me by the Swedish prosecutors basically were the crucial documents which have allowed me to discover what was going on. What did I discover? I did discover that basically I finally understood why the Swedish prosecutors didn't go to London to questioning, which was the decision which basically created this judicial and then diplomatic quagmire. Because had they traveled to London to question him and took a decision whether to charge him or whether to drop the case once and for all, we would not be in this situation, because this Swedish investigation has been going on since 2010. To this day, they haven't decided whether to charge him, which is very, very unusual. I mean, after 9 years after it was open, they still haven't decided whether to charge Julian Assange for rape or whether to drop the case once and for all. I mean, so thanks to this Swedish access, I was able to get these documents. And immediately after getting these documents, I filed my Freedom of Information Act request to the UK. And at that point, the UK refused to release me any document. They said we had to protect our capability to extradite people. We cannot provide you any document. And I was saying, why you are refusing me this document when the Swedish prosecutor released me 226 pages of documents, quite few documents, but still important documents. So at that point, I realized that there was something wrong, something suspicious about their refusal to release me the document. And I was right, because after this, they basically, even the Swedish prosecutors stopped collaborating with me. They didn't want to refuse new documents. And I was finally forced to sue the UK, the Swedish and the UK authorities. So at the end, I realized that they want to hide these documents, because they have released me very few documents, but some of them are very important. Some of them are crucial to understand how the UK authorities intervene in the case.
So before you explain what you found, because you found things, does that happen often? People taking them to court if they're not complying with the FOIA request?
Well, at the end of the day, if you are a journalist, if they don't want to release you documents, there's no other solution. You have to sue the authorities. You have to file a case, a FOIA case, and you need to go before a tribunal. I mean, there is no other way to approach this. It's not so common, but it's all you can do. I mean, you cannot put a gun to their heads. You have to go to file a case before a tribunal and fight before a tribunal, and it's very expensive and it's very time consuming. You are moving in a different jurisdictions, so you need lawyers, you need trusted expert able to advise you. So it's very heavy. I mean, I have been fighting this for the last 4 years, and it's very, very heavy.
Yeah, but you managed. So you got some information. Now, this, to my understanding, this is a situation. Sweden wants someone who is in United Kingdom but has gotten asylum by Ecuador. They want to extradite him, so they request him to be extradited. And United Kingdom doesn't really play a role in that. I mean, it's Sweden wanting someone from Ecuador. That's the way I would see that. However, what you found in those documents is that there's communication between the Crown Prosecution Service of the United Kingdom and the Swedes. So what did you find?
So basically, everything started in 2010 when Julian had no asylum from Ecuador. And at that point, Assange had already asked Sweden to questioning without extraditing him, because Julian Assange never opposed questioning. You know, you have to realize that the whole case is about what is called minor rape, which is the less serious crime, the less serious sexual allegation. And if Julian Assange will be ever charged for this alleged crime, he is spending between 2 weeks and 4 years in jail. So it's the less serious crime. So you have to realize that back in 2010, this rape investigation was open, and it was immediately closed after 4 or 5 days by the then Stockholm chief prosecutor Eva Finney. But Assange was questioned. The prosecutor basically kept open an investigation about sexual molestation. Assange was questioned. He never refused to be questioned about this alleged sexual molestation. But the day after he was questioned about sexual molestation, a different Swedish prosecutor, reopened the investigation on alleged rape. And since then, since the 1st of September 2010, this investigation has remained to the stage where Assange was never charged. He was never, basically the investigation was never dropped. So it is a kind of judicial paralysis. And so back in 2015, I said that it's impossible that basically this investigation is still at the preliminary stage, and these prosecutors don't travel to London to question him. Why they are not traveling there? I mean, I had some conversation with Italian prosecutors, very good Italian prosecutors, and they were asking me why they don't go to London to question him, and they just decide what to do, whether they want to charge or whether they want to drop the case once and for all. And these prosecutors basically told me, I think you should look on this. You should try to understand why they don't travel to London. This is the key of the case. So my only way to approach this was to try to file a Freedom of Information request to Sweden and ask the Swedish prosecutors for the documents, why they don't travel to London to question him. And it was at that point that I got these documents providing evidence that it was the UK Crown Prosecution Service, the agency in charge of cooperating with the Swedish prosecutor, because let's not forget that Assange was under investigation in Sweden, but it was in London. That's why Sweden needed the cooperation of the UK authorities, the Crown Prosecution Service. So I got this email, which was very clear, very open about the fact that it was the UK Crown Prosecution Service which had advised the Swedish prosecutor against the possibility of traveling to London. And I got even other documents. I got documents saying, please do not think that this extradition case is being dealt with as just another extradition request, which make you wonder what's special about this extradition request. Why do the UK authorities write this? I mean, it's what do they mean? What is special about the Assange case? You know?
Did you get an answer? Did you find an answer already on that?
No, that's the problem. When I started getting this information, I started looking at all this correspondence, and I basically tried to get the same correspondence from the UK authorities, but they denied to me. So I sued them. I filed a FOIA case before the London Tribunal, and they initially denied. They kept denying me documents, but as the hearing approached, they released me a little of correspondence, few documents, and at that point, I was trying to understand what was special about this case. Why they say, don't believe, why they write to the Swedish prosecutors, please do not think that this extradition is being dealt, this case being dealt as just another extradition request. And why did they advise not to travel to London? So I tried to understand this. I was looking at the correspondence, and the Crown Prosecution Service had told me and my lawyers that they had released us all the correspondence they had with the Swedish prosecutors, but we discovered it was not true. It was not true that they had released to us everything. Why we discovered this? We discovered this because we discovered there were gaps. So, for example, there were no emails, no correspondence about crucial times, like the weeks Julian Assange had requested asylum, or the weeks he had obtained asylum, and it was not possible that basically in those weeks the Swedish prosecutors and the UK authorities had no correspondence. I mean, it was not credible. So at that point, I told the UK Crown Prosecution Service, look, you didn't release me everything. You should have more correspondence. And it was at that point that they said, we destroyed them. We destroyed the document. So it was thanks to this that we discovered that the UK authorities have destroyed crucial documents about a case which is highly controversial and is still ongoing, which is highly suspicious. Why did they destroy these documents? What did the documents contain? Why did they say that this case is not like another extradition request? Why did they advise the Swedish prosecutor not to travel to London? Yeah. Which is the decision, which is a crucial decision, the decision which basically created this legal and then diplomatic paralysis.
Okay, so just to summarize and see if I got everything straight, and again, I urge people to re-look at that interview with Nils Meltzer of the United Nations, in which he details explicitly what went on in that accusation case in Sweden. To summarize that one, Assange was in Sweden, heard that some two females were making accusations, so he went to police and made a statement and said, well, if I need to be interviewed again or whatever, I'm here at your disposal, I'll come. So now everything was good, the case was closed, and then he said, I need to go to London, and as soon as he was abroad, the case was reopened and there was an international arrest warrant for him. So that's when he decided not to go back to Sweden, and it took years and years. So Nils Meltzer details that in the other interview. Now, what you found is that there's communication between Crown Prosecution Service in the United Kingdom and the Prosecution Service in Sweden. And one of the things that United Kingdom said to Sweden is, this is not an ordinary extradition case. Now, we know it's not ordinary, but that's emotional. You know, this is one of the top information dossiers that's out there with the disclosures as of 2010. So you feel it must be have something to do with that, but you couldn't find anything as of yet. What you did find, however, is that Crown Prosecution Service told the Swedes, or asked the Swedes, well, don't go interview him here, which ended up with the stalemate. So that ended up Assange sitting in the United Kingdom and later in the embassy for years, because he couldn't leave and he wasn't being interviewed. Now the last one is United Kingdom destroyed evidence, destroyed emails. So what did they destroy?
Well, I would like to ask them. I would like to know what did they destroy. I think they destroyed important correspondence, because I mean, if you look at the documents I obtained, there is nothing about the weeks Assange basically got asylum. There is nothing about the weeks Assange asked for asylum. And there is no correspondence about I mean, if you look at their correspondence, you realize that they discuss all sorts of topics, the British weather, the Swedish weather, and the nice Christmas in Sweden, and they never ever discuss whether Assange is in danger for his publication. I mean, at that time, back in 2010, when the UK Crown Prosecution Service and the Swedish prosecutors were in correspondence about the case. Assange had just published very crucial, important documents which are at the center of his charges, the espionage charges, because those are among the most important WikiLeaks publications, the documents about the wars in Afghanistan, in Iraq, the US diplomacy cables, the Guantanamo detainees documents. So it's impossible that the Swedish prosecutors and the UK authorities never discussed these topics. It's impossible they never discussed whether they thought Assange was wanted by the US. Yeah. So what they probably destroyed is really important. It's highly suspicious that they destroyed it.
Okay, let's leave that for a bit and move to the other investigation that you did into communications between United States and United Kingdom, because that exists as well. Now, what we're going to talk about is the police in United Kingdom, the Metropolitan Police, and the Department of Justice in United States. So, when did that investigation that you did start?
Yeah, so you have to realize that I have two FOIAs, two important FOIA cases. One is about Julian Assange. And this case is the one which basically has allowed me to discover that they destroyed the documents, that it was the UK Crown Prosecution Service which basically advised the Swedish prosecutors not to go there to question him. And it was the Crown Prosecution Service which basically was against the possibility of closing the case back in 2013, because this is what the documents say. In 2013, the Swedish prosecutors were considering dropping the case. And the UK authorities were against this possibility, which, again, one wonder why. I mean, what kind of interest they had in the case, considering that the investigation was from Sweden. It's incredible. So this is the Assange FOIA. Then I have another FOIA, which is about 3 WikiLeaks journalists, former and current WikiLeaks journalists. And these 3 WikiLeaks journalists are basically Christine Rafson, Joseph Farrell, and Sarah Harrison. And many have heard about Sarah Harrison. Many have heard about her because she flew to Hong Kong to Edward Snowden. And let's not forget that if Edward Snowden is not sitting, is not in a US jail, maximum security prison, is all thanks to this woman, this journalist, Sarah Harrison. It is thanks to Julian Assange and the WikiLeaks staff, which basically helped Edward Snowden to seek asylum. And they will have serious troubles for life for helping him. I mean, there's no doubt about this. However, I have this FOIA about these 3 journalists. Why about them? Because back in 2015, we learned that basically Google had secretly provided the US authorities all the correspondence about this, all the personal correspondence of these 3 journalists to the US authorities. They did so secretly, and then Google disclosed it to these 3 journalists after 3 years. So at that, even in that case, I said, I have to realize, I have to look for facts. I have to discover why they targeted these 3 journalists, what they were looking for, what kind of correspondence, what kind of information they were looking. And so I filed freedom of information request to the UK Metropolitan Police, which is widely known as Scotland Yard. And I asked for the full correspondence between Scotland Yard and the US authorities, which means the US Department of Justice and the US State Department, about these 3 journalists. Again, the Metropolitan Police refused me any document. So I decided to file a FOIA case before the first tier tribunal in London, and my lawyers and I won the case. So basically, the first tier tribunal ordered Scotland Yard to confirm or deny whether they had any correspondence with the US authorities. And they did. They did confirm that they had correspondence. Now they are denying us these documents. So we know that they had correspondence, but they refuse to provide copies of this correspondence. And we want to appeal again because we want to get this correspondence. Yeah. We think it is in our right to know what kind of correspondence they had about these three journalists, because this investigation about WikiLeaks, about Julian Assange and the WikiLeaks stuff, is completely secret, you know. They have been under investigation for 9 years. Do you know any media organization which has been under investigation, for continuous investigation for 9 years? Completely secret, all their correspondence put under surveillance, and probably all their sources put under surveillance, probably all their communications put under surveillance. I think there is a serious threat to journalism. I mean, imagine if they do this to the New York Times or to the Washington Post, there would be a massive scandal, because you're not allowed to keep a media investigation under continuous, you are not allowed to put a media organization under continuous investigations for years, and everything is secret. You don't know why they are under investigation. You don't know what they get secretly, because
you get the impression that New York Times and all the other big outlets are treated differently from WikiLeaks, which is also a journalistic organization. Has that impact, all the work that you're doing it also for Repubblica, which is a big media outlet in Italy. Has it affected the way Repubblica has been perceived in the United States or by United States authorities?
Well, honestly, I don't know. It's difficult for me to have this kind of feedback from US authorities. As a matter of fact, I could tell you that I have published whatever WikiLeaks has published. I've published stories on all the documents, and I was never put under investigation. I was never spied. As far as I know, I was never put in jail. Like Julian Assange was never charged with anything. So it's obvious that there is a different treatment, and WikiLeaks is treated differently from traditional media, which is, I think, is a serious scandal.
Yeah. Now, for the longest time, we didn't even know if there was an indictment against Assange, if the United States wanted him to arrest him or not. They were being very secretive about that until, by accident, it was revealed through another channel that they actually had a secret warrant out for Assange. But that was never revealed about Sarah Harrison and Christine Rasmussen and Joseph Farrell, like you just mentioned. The only thing we know of those three is that Google had to volunteer their email boxes to United States services, right? So then you started doing your FOIAs. So what did you, and they said, oh, we're not going to give you anything. So then
exactly.
Yeah.
But they confirmed that they had correspondence. So if they had correspondence, I doubt they were discussing having tea time or spending holidays in London. They were discussing the work of these journalists, and they were discussing the WikiLeaks work. So it's pretty. I don't know whether there is an indictment against these three current and former WikiLeaks journalists, but as a matter of fact, they have been targeted because there is this correspondence.
Now, the reason that they didn't want to answer your FOIA, they didn't even want to explain the reason why they didn't want to answer it, which you then FOIA'd that one, asked for that reason, and apparently they were of the opinion that you were not representing those people. It's their private information, so you were not, as a journalist, representing those people properly according to those services. Then you had to make that explicitly clear, that you were representing these people in this FOIA track, right? Did I understand that correct?
Well, actually, the Metropolitan Police was arguing you don't have the right as a journalist to access these documents about these three people because you should go through their lawyers. So you're not allowed to access yourself the documents. You should do it through their lawyers. And they said, no, a journalist is not supposed to depend on the lawyers of other people. A journalist is supposed to look for documents independently because this is what journalistic investigation is. Look for documents independently because the lawyers of these three people could have all sorts of rationale motivation for giving me some documents while denying me other documents. So I want to be able to access the documents myself because I want to do my own research, so I want to do my investigation and looking for facts independently.
Yeah, well, you managed. So far in this story, the way you're telling it, you're the investigative journalist that's doing her job properly, whatever the Metropolitan Police Services think about that. But but the thing is, their unwillingness to cooperate, that's something you see in more jurisdictions. You saw that with other countries as well. So in your interpretation, or why is that? Well, what is the balance between what is the balance of the interest that they serve?
Well, it's obvious to me that they want to hide their investigation on WikiLeaks. They want to hide what they have done against them. They have targeted them. They have probably kept them for years under surveillance. They have been spying. I say spying, and I mean intercepting their conversation, all their conversation, probably, all their sources, probably, all their contacts with other medias, from La Repubblica to colleagues in Germany at Der Spiegel or Süddeutsche Zeitung and everywhere. So it's pretty troubling to me that they have done all these activities against a media organization for 9 years. I mean, imagine if they do this. Imagine if the UK authorities and the US authorities do this to the New York Times. It would be a scandal. I mean, it would be totally unacceptable because if you have any reason to believe that a media organization is involved in committing some crimes, you have to open an investigation, to charge these people and to close your investigation, to go to the tribunal. And in this case, they have been keeping this investigation for years and completely shrouded in secrecy. Yeah. This is pretty troubling to me. And if you consider even the condition in which Assange has been kept is completely scandalous, completely unacceptable. I mean, it's not my opinion that he has remained arbitrarily detained for the last 9 years. Tell me another editor who has been arbitrarily detained in our Western societies for the last 9 years. You won't find it.
I totally agree. And all this information is not only that. I mean, it's been confirmed by United Nations special rapporteurs. First, the arbitrary detention, and then the psychological torture. So if that is happening in your country, then all of British Parliament and Boris Johnson and all his predecessors should have made a case about that. You don't hear anything. But even more troublesome maybe than that is that also the big media outlets are not reporting. I'm talking to Stefania Maurizi from Italy. She's doing this, but there's not too many of you. Is there?
Absolutely. I mean, what I think is really troubling is that, do you want a media organization able to report on the true face of the war in Afghanistan, on the true face of the war in Iraq, on the Guantanamo detainees? Do you want this? I think it is crucial in our democracies. So if you want a media organization able to do this, you have to create the conditions for this being possible. And so you cannot be silent when the editor-in-chief of such a media organization is put under arbitrary detention. If
Yeah.
you think at what happened in the last 9 years, no Western media dare to say, I don't think we should keep a human being arbitrarily detained in an embassy without an hour outdoors. I think it is a big scandal, I mean.
Yeah, yeah. All right, let's go back to that case, because if we look at the previous case, through Sweden FOIA, you discovered that actually the Crown Prosecution Service was communicating to Sweden, and then when you put that to them, they grudgingly acknowledged. Now, again, through the FOIA between United States and Metropolitan Police Services, eventually you got some answers, and in the tribunal it was found that the Metropolitan Police Services had failed in its duty to advise and assist Maurizi, that's you, by refusing her Freedom of Information request with explaining that it needed clarification over the consent provided by WikiLeaks staff. So they didn't want to give you the answer that you were looking for, and the reason, they didn't even want to say that the reason was that you might not be really representing those 3 people. Now, once that was established, we learned that they didn't want to cooperate because disclosure may, in the circumstances, infer information about the Metropolitan Police Services cooperation with another law enforcement organization and undermine future cooperation between law enforcement organizations. So what I'm reading up here is quoted, it's written, it's online, I'll put the links under the interview as well. Here we have it. UK services are not willing to cooperate because it would undermine their future cooperation with different services, correct?
Yeah, this is what they always argue. They try to say, look, we cannot cooperate with you because if we disclose anything to you, then we undermine our ability to investigate, we undermine our ability to extradite people. Yeah. And we said, look, what do you want to do? Do you want to extradite an editor, Julian Assange, as if you are extraditing a mafia killer? This is not what you should do. I mean, they are comparing, they are putting in the same box extradition of a mafia killer, drug dealers, and an editor. This is completely unacceptable. I mean, if you look at the espionage charges against Julian Assange, all those charges are about his publication. All those charges are about proper journalism, revealing documents about the Afghan wars, Iraq wars, the US diplomacy cables, Guantanamo. So how can you accept that an editor is extradited for his journalism and is put in the same box as an extradition of a mafia dealer or a mafia killer or a drug dealer? This is completely unacceptable. So when the UK authorities were telling me we have to protect this tradition, we objected, look, he's an editor. You cannot treat him as a mafia dealer.
Yeah, well, okay. So there's good journalists out there. And you managed to get some information through years and years of work. Another thing that you managed to do is one of the FOIA tracks was called precedent setting. Individuals can be represented by journalists. So that was established, and that might be used in the future more often, so that people don't have to do it themselves. So journalists can actually make this case. So that was something that you managed to do. Then things escalated. March 8th this year, Chelsea Manning was jailed again. April 11th, Assange was taken from the embassy and put in prison, in Belmarsh prison in London. And so it's now August when we're recording this. What's happened since April 11th? Do you have any new developments?
Well, we know that Chelsea is resisting. She's a hero of mine. I mean, she's resisting pressure because the US authorities want to force her to testify against Julian Assange. They are desperate about getting a conspiracy case between Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange so that they can use it for putting Julian Assange in jail for life, which is what they want. Absolutely, they want to put Julian Assange in jail for life because they want to set a precedent. They wanted to establish a deterrent so that no other journalist, no other publisher, no other internet activist or whatever you want, basically publishes secret documents about wars, secret documents about drones, secret documents about NSA mass surveillance. These people at the highest level want absolute lack of sunlight. They don't want continuous exposure. They don't want people able to expose their secrets, their abuses, their serious human rights violation, and they fear a domino effect because they fear that there might be hundreds Chelsea Manning, there might be hundreds Edward Snowden. So they are desperate about setting a deterrent. They absolutely want Julian Assange in jail for life, and they are putting all sorts of pressure on Chelsea Manning, and she's resisting. She's a hero. She's a model of resistance. And as for Julian Assange, he's resisting as well, but his health is of serious concern. I'm seriously concerned that they want to drag him down, you know? So otherwise, why to put him in jail for 50 weeks? 50 weeks. I mean, consider what they have done to this man. They have kept him 9 years under arbitrary detention, no access to health, no access, no possibility going to hospital when he needed to go there. And he was arrested. He was put in a high security prison. Can you imagine an editor put in a prison with dangerous terrorists, real criminal, and he was put in jail for 50 weeks in this such harsh condition. Why? Because they want to drag him down, again, to set a precedent.
Now, parts of the rule of law are still intact. I mean, you can still file a FOIA, but other than that, this is lawfare. It's not my invention, that word of warfare, using the law as a weapon.
Absolutely.
So that's established as well, and it's a word that's being used more and more often. Now, in your assessment, did United States authorities communicate with UK authorities demonstrating that they intended to extradite Assange already as of 2010, you think?
You know, this is a big question. Actually, this is what I'm looking for from the very beginning of my FOIA, because you should know that basically they refused to provide me any copy of the correspondence between the US and the UK between 2010 and 2015. They even refused to confirm or deny whether they had this correspondence. And you wonder why. I mean, if they had no correspondence, why not to say that openly? The Swedish people did say we didn't have any correspondence with them. We didn't have any correspondence with the US. So the UK authorities have always refused to confirm or deny whether they have correspondence, which I think means that they had, because if they didn't have such correspondence, why not to say? So I want this kind of correspondence, and that's why I appealed to the upper tribunal. We had the hearing the 1st of July, last July, and we are still waiting for the judgment. We hope that the upper tribunal will rule in our favor and will order the UK Crown Prosecution Service to confirm or deny whether they had this correspondence with the US from the very beginning.
You've been doing this for 10 years now. What's your, how do you measure your faith in the rule of law and that process working?
Well, actually, the FOIA struggle has been going on since 2015, so the last 4 years.
Okay, fair enough.
But it has been very intense. Very time-consuming, very expensive. You have to realize that you have to be able to pay lawyers. You have to be able to attend hearings. So you have to be able to travel and spend a lot of money for this. And you know, I don't trust the process. I'm not sure I trust the process. But at the same time, whenever you do this, whenever you get them confirming, whenever you get a tiny bit of information, you get small pieces of this large puzzle. So, you know, even if you don't win the case, even if at the end of the day you are fighting against, this impossible establishment, but you get tiny bits
What's your
of information.
What's your assessment of your colleague journalists all over the world not doing this, what you are doing? I mean, you're doing investigative journalism into this dossier. To my knowledge, you're the only one going to this far. So why are the other people not doing this?
To be honest, I don't know. I mean, it's for me. It was pretty shocking to realize that no one had tried to do it. Especially if you consider that there have been thousands of articles about Julian Assange, about his cat, about all sorts of silly things, and so. I really cannot understand why no one tried to get the facts, because this is what a journalist is supposed to do. How can you cover the cat when you have these important things to discover? It's not a good situation for journalism.
Now, the journalists working with WikiLeaks have been personally targeted as well, just like the three we discussed already. Now, you're representing them during those FOIA cases. Do you ever feel insecure, personally targeted?
Well, first of all, it's really important that I'm not representing. I'm allowed to access their documents because the tribunal basically ruled that I'm allowed to access the documents, even if the Metropolitan Police try to argue, no, she's not allowed to access these documents because she should rely on the lawyers of these three journalists. And they said, no, I don't want to rely on the lawyers of these three journalists. I want to investigate independently because this is what a journalist is supposed to do. So I have never been targeted for my work. This is, crucial to understand that basically all this warfare, all this lawfare have targeted Julian Assange, have targeted the WikiLeaks journalists, have targeted Sarah Harrison, have targeted the whole WikiLeaks staff, but not the media partners. And it's really unfair, you know?
Yeah. So WikiLeaks has now been portrayed by some official services as well, but to be a foreign adversary, a state-sponsored foreign adversary even. Now, if those stories are made even through official channels, how are you being depicted as a journalist? Is your credibility also being attacked, or do you fear that, your credibility as a journalist?
Well, I think they have tried. Some have tried to say, oh, she's not a real journalist. She has some strange interests. Maybe she's associated to WikiLeaks in some strange ways. I'm not associated to WikiLeaks in any strange ways. I'm a journalist. I have been working for my newspaper. I have been working as a media partner with them for the last 10 years, so quite a lot of time, but always working for my newspaper. And of course, I'm working on their documents, so I know their documents very well. I know them rather well. And they have tried, some have tried to undermine my professional credibility. But at the end of the day, my work is public. So I have been in this business of journalism for the last 18 years. I have made many different investigations, and so it's my work speaks for itself,
Oh yes, it does. So I'm enjoying this conversation, and thank you so much for providing all this information. Now, in closing, you started this talk by explaining that there's like two layers of power. There's the ones that you know and that you see and that are on television, that are accountable. Those are the people we can vote for every couple of years. And there's the other layer that you don't really get to see and that's being secretive. Now, the first one, the one that we all know, and the people in Parliament, they get to make the laws. Should they change transparency laws? Should they improve FOIA laws now that you've used them so extensively over the last couple of years? What should be changed in the law to make your journalistic work easier?
Well, this is a good question. Again, So first of all, yes, transparency laws are crucial, you know, and journalists need to be able to access actual documents, to access hard copies documents. They need to get the facts. Otherwise, all they get is rumors, opinions, speculations. That's not journalism. So it's crucial that we get good transparency law, good FOIA, freedom of information laws. And it's crucial that journalists are allowed to litigate, are allowed to have the financial resources to investigate, to properly, to do serious investigative journalism, because otherwise you just have that kind of journalism based on press releases, on rumors, on kind of political silliness and so on. So and you need to be able to get this kind of financial support in order to be able to do real investigative journalism. But most of all, you need to be able to investigate that level of power. So you need to be able to access secret documents. You need to be able to protect sources. Because if you think about sources, our sources are at enormous risk. Just look at how Chelsea Manning has been treated. She has spent 7 years in prison, in very harsh conditions. She tried to commit suicide twice. Look at Edward Snowden. He's one of the most important sources of all times. And he was put in the condition of escaping to Russia. This is, how can we accept this? If you expose power as he did, as Chelsea did, you should be able to do it safely in your country if you are a democracy. You know, it can't be tolerated that you have to escape to another country and you have to risk your life for exposing very important information in the public interest. So journalists should should stand in solidarity and have serious laws, important laws protecting sources, because we risk as journalists.
Well,
our sources are exposed to some of the most serious risks.
To end on a positive note, this is the Netherlands reaching out to Italy with hearing your story and telling it to the world. So thank you so much, Stefania Maurizi, for doing that. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Rico. Thanks for all this good conversation.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.